I'll marry anyone who can play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 flawlessly. Caleb Monroe said it casually, as if it were a joke, something tossed into the air like a glass of champagne meant to sparkle and vanish. The gala had been in full swing, crystal chandeliers, shimmering above a sea of tuxedos and gowns. Laughter rising in elegant bursts, music lingering somewhere between tasteful and forgettable. His voice, however, cut through all of that. People laughed, of course. Someone clinked a fork against a glass. A woman with too much perfume placed a hand on Caleb's arm and asked if he was serious. He smiled the kind of smile that meant nothing and everything. The press would eat it up. The mysterious tech billionaire, tired of fortune offering his heart to Chopin. A perfect soundbite. Caleb leaned back in his seat, watching the guests murmur and chuckle. It was all noise and cameras and curated elegance. He swirled the wine in his glass and waited for the moment to pass. But across the room by the bar, a waitress froze. She had been walking with a tray of champagne flutes, balanced effortlessly on one hand, her other adjusting a loose strand of hair behind her ear. When the words left Caleb's mouth, she didn't laugh. She didn't move. She simply stared at the piano in the corner of the ballroom, as if it had said something first. The piano was beautiful. A Steinway grand polished to a black mirror finish, placed on a small platform near the stage. It had not been touched all evening. It was meant to be decor, a reminder of sophistication, not a tool of meaning. But Evelyn Hart didn't see it as decor. She saw it as something else entirely. She moved before she thought. Placing the tray on the bar, she walked across the floor, her black uniform catching no attention. No one noticed her until she stepped up onto the platform, sat at the bench, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. By the time Caleb realized someone was moving toward the piano, it was already too late. The first notes had begun. Chopin's Ballad No. 1 is not a piece for the faint-hearted. It breathes, it explodes, it seduces, and it demands. Evelyn played it not like someone proving a point, but like someone remembering how to speak after years of silence. The room fell away. The laughter died. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Her hands moved with impossible precision and restrained passion. Every note was both practiced and alive. Caleb sat up. For the first time all evening, his face lost its polished charm. He leaned forward, lips slightly parted. She played straight through. There were no mistakes, no theatrics, just the sound of someone who had once lived inside a song and was now trying to find her way back. When the final chord faded into the room, Evelyn stood, nodded once to the silent audience, and walked off stage without looking at anyone. She returned to the bar, picked up her tray, and walked into the service hallway like nothing had happened. It took the guests several seconds to breathe again. Caleb remained frozen. Something had cracked in him. He didn't know what it was, only that it wasn't fixable with charm or money. The woman hadn't said a word, not to him, not to anyone, but he had heard her loud and clear. Later that evening, when the gala resumed and the background music returned to its pleasant mediocrity, no one mentioned the moment again. Not out loud. It became one of those unexplainable things that pass through a night like lightning, beautiful and terrifying, and gone before anyone understands what it meant. Except Caleb. He didn't sleep that night, not because a woman had impressed him. That happened more often than he cared to admit. But because her music had made him feel something he didn't know he'd lost. and because she left before he could ask her name. Evelyn Hart never looked back when she walked off the stage that night. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't glance at Caleb Monroe or any of the guests whose jaws had dropped in a collective silence. She simply picked up her tray and disappeared through the back hallway, heels soft against the service floor, heart pounding so loud she thought it might shatter the wine glasses. By the time the event ended and the guests poured out into the freezing Manhattan air, she was already home, already barefoot, already letting the sound of the city fill the silence she had opened with her own two hands. Her apartment was small but quiet. The walls were filled with second-hand books and old photos. A chipped mug rested on the windowsill with 3 piano-shaped bookmarks sticking out. A gray cat named Tofu blinked up at her from a battered chair, too lazy to care that she'd just played the most perfect rendition of Ballade No. 1 in a room full of billionaires. Evelyn fed him, changed into an oversized sweater, and sat at her kitchen table without turning on the lights. She didn't need them. The melody was still playing in her mind, not as a performance, but as a memory she hadn't meant to touch. She hadn't played in 3 years, not since the accident, not since the hospital waiting room, not since the guilt began. The piano had been her world, her voice, her rebellion, and her refuge, until it became the thing that stole her sister. Until one snowy night, a 14-year-old girl named Ava Hart died in a car on the way to her big sister's concert. Evelyn never played again, not even once, not until tonight. It wasn't planned. The moment had swallowed her whole. Something about the arrogance in Caleb's voice, something about the way people laughed, as if music were a trick, not a truth, had pushed her over the edge. She hadn't wanted to impress anyone. She had wanted to remind herself that it was still hers, that pain hadn't taken everything. And for 3.5 minutes she did. Then she ran. The next morning at Vivace, her cafe job resumed like nothing had changed. Leonard, the cafe owner, was already polishing glasses when she walked in. He didn't mention the gala, didn't ask what happened. He simply nodded and said coffee's hot and the milk delivery's late again. That was Leonard, 65 years old, former jazz violinist, retired widowed, and owner of the best espresso in Brooklyn. He had taken Evelyn in when no one else would give her a job, never asked about her past, and made space for her silence. The cafe was a small miracle. Wooden floors, mismatched chairs, a counter lined with tiny succulents in chipped teacups, and in the far corner, a black upright piano that had not been tuned in over a year. Evelyn avoided it like a ghost. Leonard never pushed her, but today she saw him glance at it just once, then back at her. She didn't flinch, but she felt the sting. Around 11, the bell above the door jingled, and Caleb Monroe stepped in. No cameras, no entourage, just him in a navy coat and black scarf, looking too polished for the peeling brick walls around him. Evelyn was behind the counter, pouring oat milk into a latte, when she noticed him. Their eyes met. He smiled, small and cautious, the way someone smiles when approaching a wounded animal. She didn't smile back. Leonard leaned in from the kitchen doorway and whispered, "Friend of yours." Evelyn replied without blinking, "Customer." Caleb approached slowly, ordered a cappuccino, no mention of the gala, no questions about the piano, just please and thank you and a glance at the cat sleeping in the window. Evelyn made the drink, slid it across the counter, and went back to wiping the espresso machine. Caleb didn't leave. He took a seat near the piano and sipped quietly. 15 minutes passed, then 30. Evelyn caught herself looking over once then again. Leonard noticed, said nothing, but as he passed her with a tray of pastries, he murmured, "Some people don't come to be heard. They come to listen." Evelyn didn't answer, but her hands shook when she refilled the sugar jar. Caleb came back the next day, and the next, always alone, always ordering the same drink, always sitting near the piano. He never brought up that night, never mentioned Chopin or marriage, or the fact that she had stolen every breath from a ballroom full of billionaires. He simply sat and waited, and Evelyn, without knowing why, started to look forward to the sound of the bell over the door. By the end of the week, Caleb Monroe had become a fixture at Vivace. He always came in during the quiet hour between the morning rush and lunch, always ordered a cappuccino with a double shot, and always sat at the table, closest to the piano without ever touching it. Evelyn noticed that he never took calls, never brought a laptop, never looked at his phone. He simply watched the street outside the window as if waiting for something that might never arrive. At first, she assumed it was guilt or curiosity, or some kind of billionaire boredom. But by the fourth visit, something shifted. He started bringing a notebook, not a sleek tablet or an expensive leather journal, just a simple spiral notebook with a black cover and bent corners. He would open it after his first sip of coffee and begin to write. Not like someone documenting or planning, more like someone remembering. One afternoon, Leonard passed by his table and gave a small nod toward the notebook. Writing a memoir or a confession? Son Caleb smiled faintly and said, "I think it's a little of both." Evelyn overheard it and almost smiled. Almost. That afternoon, when she was wiping down tables, she passed by his spot and saw one line written in clean, precise handwriting. "Some people don't play to perform, they play to survive." She didn't say anything, but her breath caught. That night when the cafe closed, Evelyn stayed behind to finish inventory. Leonard lingered, claiming he had receipts to review, but she knew better. He always found excuses to stay when he sensed something stirring in her chest. He sat at the counter, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching her alphabetize the tea shelf for the third time. Finally, he spoke. "You know he's not the first broken soul to find this place." Evelyn didn't turn around. "I'm not broken." Leonard chuckled gently. "Didn't say you were, just said this place seems to collect the quiet ones." Evelyn paused, one hand resting on a tin of chamomile. "Do you think he's just curious?" Leonard shrugged. "I think he heard something he didn't expect. And I think he's not sure if it was yours or his." The next day it rained, the kind of heavy gray rain that made New York feel like an old painting. Caleb showed up soaked to the bone, his coat dripping, hair flattened. Evelyn handed him a towel before he even asked. He looked surprised. "She said you'll ruin the chairs." He nodded and took it, dabbing his face and hair with clumsy gratitude. That afternoon, something changed. He didn't sit by the piano. He sat at the bar, right across from her. She raised an eyebrow. Out of seats, he shook his head. "I just thought I'd try a different view." Evelyn leaned back, arms crossed. "And what do you see?" Caleb studied her for a moment. "Someone who plays like she's remembering how to breathe." Evelyn stared at him, then turned away. "You don't know me." "No," he said quietly, "but I'd like to." Silence fell between them. Not awkward, just thick, like a chord waiting to resolve. Caleb stood. "I'll be back tomorrow." Evelyn didn't look up. "You always are." That night she stayed late again, this time alone. The storm had cleared. The city hummed outside, cars splashing through wet streets. Inside Vivas, everything was still. She walked to the piano. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She didn't play, not yet, but she let her hand fall to the surface flat and open as if trying to remember what it felt like to trust something again. She didn't know Caleb Monroe, not really, but she knew the way he listened, and it made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone could hear her without needing to fix her. The next morning Caleb returned, and this time when he ordered his cappuccino, Evelyn asked, "Do you write music?" He blinked. "No, I listen to it, and sometimes I write about how it makes me feel." Evelyn tilted her head. "And what did it feel like the other night?" "When I played Caleb met her eyes, like I wasn't alone anymore." Evelyn didn't reply, but when she handed him his drink, her fingers brushed his just slightly. Not enough to be noticed, but enough to mean something. The next few days unfolded like a song without lyrics. No dramatic gestures, no confessions, just small moments stacked gently on top of each other. Evelyn found herself anticipating the sound of the bell above the cafe door at 10:42 each morning. The exact minute Caleb began to arrive like clockwork. He never pushed, never asked her to play, never even brought up the gala again. But something about his presence made her feel less like she was being watched and more like she was finally being seen. One evening, as the cafe quieted, Leonard pulled out a dusty cassette player from under the counter. He set it down with the kind of reverence most people reserve for sacred objects. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "What is that supposed to be?" Leonard smirked. "That is me in 1987, at the Blue Note playing violin badly and thinking I was the second coming of Miles Davis." Evelyn laughed for the first time in days. It came out surprised, unguarded. Leonard hit play. The music that followed was shaky, uneven, full of imperfections, but also full of life. Evelyn listened for a while, then asked softly, "Do you miss it?" Leonard didn't answer right away. "I don't miss performing, but I do miss what it felt like when I didn't have to pretend I was okay." Evelyn nodded, eyes distant. "I used to feel that way at the piano, like I could be anything, like it didn't matter what people thought." Leonard watched her carefully. "It still doesn't." She shook her head. "It's not about people, it's about memory. The last time I played for someone I loved, she never made it to the performance." Leonard placed a gentle hand on the counter. "Maybe it's time you play for someone who doesn't ask you to perform, just someone who listens." That night, Evelyn stayed after closing again. This time, she locked the doors, turned off the lights, and sat at the piano without hesitation. The city breathed softly through the windows. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play something quiet, something unfinished. Notes stumbled out like they'd been waiting at the edge of her fingertips for years. She didn't know the melody. It came in fragments rising and falling, like a conversation she hadn't yet had. Outside, Caleb stood in the rain. He had come back on impulse, walking without purpose, until his feet took him to Vivis. He had been about to turn away when he heard it. The music floated through the cracks in the window, muffled but unmistakable. He moved closer, his breath fogging the glass hands tucked in his coat. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. He just stood there and listened. Evelyn had no idea. She played for herself, eyes closed, face soft, shoulders unguarded. It wasn't Chopin or Bach or anything from her old recitals. It was new, raw, clumsy in its beauty, and it belonged to no one but her. When the music faded, Caleb took a slow breath and walked away. He didn't need more. That moment was enough. The next day, Evelyn noticed a folded sheet of paper tucked under the sugar jar at the counter. No name, just 4 bars of melody written in pencil. It was the same melody she'd played the night before. She stared at it for a long time before she smiled. Not the rehearsed smile she wore for customers, but something real. When Caleb walked in that morning, she handed him his coffee without a word. He raised his cup in a silent toast, and she tapped the counter before returning to the register. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. That day she caught him humming, not loudly, just under his breath, the same melody, the one that hadn't had a name until now. Later, Leonard found her sitting at the piano during her break. He didn't interrupt, just walked by and whispered, "You don't always need words. Sometimes the song is enough." Evelyn looked up and saw Caleb watching from his table. That same soft expression on his face, like he was hearing something precious. She played one note, held it, and let it echo through the cafe. He didn't flinch. He just smiled. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was playing for ghosts. She was playing for someone who was still here. And that made all the difference. The first time Evelyn told Caleb about Ava, she didn't mean to. It wasn't planned or dramatic or shaped into a story for sympathy. It came out the way most truths do, slowly slipped between moments when the heart forgets to guard itself. They were sitting outside the cafe during a rare quiet afternoon, a weak sun spilling over the sidewalk. Caleb had brought 2 croissants from a bakery across the river, claiming they were worth the detour. Evelyn had taken a bite, nodded once, and said, "She used to love these, my sister." Caleb looked up. "You have a sister, had." Evelyn kept her gaze on the street. Ava, 14, too smart, too fast, always trying to keep up with me. Caleb waited. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just sipped his coffee, like it could hold the space open. I had a performance, big one, national spotlight. She begged to come. I said no. She sneaked out and took a cab with one of my teachers. They were hit by a drunk driver 4 blocks from the theater. Caleb didn't flinch, but his hand gripped the edge of the bench. Evelyn's voice didn't shake. It was too far past shaking. It was flat quiet, like a room that had been locked for years. She died before I walked on stage, and I still played, because they told me not to stop, that I owed the audience, that the show must go on. Caleb exhaled slowly. And after I walked off stage and collapsed, I haven't touched a piano since. Not until that night. He studied her. What made you play then, I don't know. Maybe it was you. Maybe it was your arrogance. Maybe it was me trying to find out if I could still feel anything besides guilt. And did you? Evelyn turned to him. You heard it. Caleb didn't smile. He didn't say something clever. He simply nodded. I did. And I haven't stopped hearing it since. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was necessary, like both of them had just opened a door and needed a moment to remember how to breathe. The next day, Evelyn arrived at the cafe early. Leonard was already there tuning the old piano with slow, deliberate care. She watched him from the doorway. You haven't touched that thing in a year. Leonard didn't look up. Thought maybe it deserved a second chance. Evelyn crossed her arms. You think a piano can forget Leonard tightened a string? No, but I think it can forgive. She stood there for a moment, then walked over and sat beside him on the bench. He handed her a cloth and pointed to the keys. Dust doesn't clean itself. They worked in silence. When they finished, the piano looked almost alive. Later that afternoon, Caleb arrived with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He sat at his usual table, nodded to Evelyn, and placed the envelope on the table like it was made of glass. She walked over during her break and stared at it. "What's that A contract, of sorts?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "For what, a small showcase? Charity event. 2 weeks from now, I'm sponsoring." Evelyn's body stiffened. "No." Caleb held up a hand. "Hear me out. No pressure, no cameras, just music. Your terms, your piece. No audience you don't approve. Just you, a piano, and a room full of people who need something real." Evelyn stared at him. "And what if I say no? Then I'll still come here every day and order coffee and pretend like I didn't dream of hearing you play again." She laughed once, dry and tired. "You're ridiculous. I've been called worse." Evelyn picked up the envelope, didn't open it, just held it like a weight she wasn't ready to carry. "I'll think about it." Caleb smiled. "That's all I'm asking." That night, Evelyn sat at the piano after closing. She didn't play Chopin. She didn't play anything she remembered. Instead, she let her fingers move slowly, testing the keys like old bones, learning how to bend again. Leonard watched from behind the counter, wiping a glass that didn't need cleaning. When she stopped, he said quietly, "You don't owe the past anything." Evelyn replied without turning around, "I'm not playing for the past. I think I'm playing for the first time. And this time I want to stay until the end." Caleb wasn't there that night, but somehow she knew he'd hear it anyway. 2 days later, Evelyn arrived at Vivas and found Leonard already behind the counter with a strange look on his face. His phone was in his hand, and his thumb hovered above the screen, like he wasn't sure whether to put it away or show it to her. She paused at the door, one eyebrow raised. "You look like you saw a ghost." Leonard didn't smile. "You might want to see this." He handed her the phone. On the screen was a short video, blurry, shaky, taken from behind a column at the gala, but unmistakably her. Her back straight hands, poised hair pulled into that same rushed bun she always wore at work, and the sound, Chopin's Ballet No. 1, crisp and electric and devastating. The caption read, "Waitress stuns billionaire crowd with surprise Chopin masterpiece." Evelyn didn't breathe as the view count rose in real-time thousands every few seconds. The comments section was already exploding. Genius in disguise. Who is she? How do we not know her name? And then the worst one. The name Caleb Monroe, tagged in bold letters, over and over. She set the phone down slowly, her hands shaking. "Did you show this to him?" Leonard shook his head. "I just found it." Evelyn grabbed her apron. "I need air." She walked out of the cafe and didn't stop walking. The city swallowed her whole, but the video followed her like a shadow. Notifications started lighting up her old social accounts. Journalists, talent scouts, strangers, all of them asking the same question. Who are you? Where have you been? Why aren't you playing? By the time she returned to the cafe, Caleb was already there, sitting in his usual seat, with the envelope still unopened. She didn't speak. He stood up as soon as he saw her. "I didn't post it, I know, but it doesn't matter. It's out. They know. And now it's all going to happen again." Evelyn's voice cracked, not with fear, but with exhaustion. The pressure, the questions, the attention. "I can't do it. Not again. Not like last time." Caleb stepped closer. "Then don't. Don't do it for them. Do it for you. for Ava. Evelyn stared at him. Her eyes were glassy, not quite crying but close. You think it's that simple? I think nothing about you is simple. But I also think people don't stop hurting just because they hide. I know what it's like to be looked at for what people want you to be. I also know how rare it is to be seen for who you really are. She turned away. I'm not ready, then don't be. Just let yourself exist in the music again. No labels, no spotlight, just play. Evelyn didn't respond, but that night when the cafe closed, she didn't leave. She walked to the piano, sat down, and placed her phone on the stand. She pressed record. She didn't speak. She just played. Not Chopin this time, not anything composed, just her. A melody without a name, soft, aching, full of breath. She played for 5 minutes straight, and when it ended, she saved the video but didn't post it. She sent it to one person. Caleb, no caption, no explanation, just the sound. He listened to it in bed, his room dark, except for the glow of the screen. He played it twice, then 3 times. On the 4th, he closed his eyes. The next morning, Evelyn found another piece of music under the sugar jar. Not written, but typed. Lyrics, just 4 lines. When the world stops listening, I'll hear you still. When the room is empty, I'll be there. When the lights are off and no one claps, I'll stand. Not for the song, but for the girl who plays it. She folded the paper and placed it in her apron pocket. She didn't say anything, but when Caleb walked in, that morning she met his eyes with something different. Not hesitation, not defense, but something like trust, quiet, fragile, growing. The video of her gala performance hit 1 million views by noon. But Evelyn didn't check it. She had a different audience now. One that didn't ask her to be perfect, just honest. And for the first time in years, she thought maybe that could be enough. The day before the charity showcase, Evelyn almost backed out. She had said yes a week ago after days of silence and one long walk along the river, where she thought about everything she had lost and everything she still might gain. Caleb had made no demands. He had simply handed her the envelope again, with a list of names, none of them famous, none of them threatening. A private venue seats for no more than 30, all attendees handpicked by Caleb, music students, young artists, a few parents, a few quiet souls. She read through it, once set it down, and said, okay. But now the weight of it pressed on her like a familiar ghost. She stood in the cafe, staring at the piano heart, thudding like it wanted to escape. Leonard wiped down the counter and glanced at her without lifting his head. Cold feet, Evelyn exhaled. It's not the people, it's the silence before I play. That silence feels like judgment. Leonard leaned on the counter. Silence isn't judgment, it's invitation. You just forgot you get to choose who walks in. She looked at him. And what if I fail? What if I freeze? Then you freeze, and we unfreeze together. That's what people who care do. Evelyn managed a smile. Leonard nodded at the piano. You're not that girl from 3 years ago. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. That night, Evelyn didn't play after hours. She went home early, fed tofu, sat on the floor, and listened to old recordings of Ava singing off-key in their childhood room. She didn't cry. She just let the sound wrap around her like a thread, pulling her back to something real. She fell asleep with the headphones still in. The morning of the event, Caleb met her at the venue, a small hall tucked between brownstones, intimate and soft-lit. No cameras, no microphones. Just a single grand piano under a warm spotlight, and a quiet crowd filtering in. Evelyn wore black, not for mourning, for focus. Her hair was tied back tightly, her hands cold but steady. Caleb walked beside her, not saying much. Before she stepped onto the stage, he handed her a folded piece of paper. She didn't open it yet. He said, "Only if you need it." She nodded, then walked through the curtains. The room fell silent as she approached the piano. No introduction, no announcement, just a bench, a key, a breath. She sat down and played. The piece was hers, entirely, a blend of what she used to be and what she had become. It was raw and controlled, familiar and new, and for the first time in years, she played not as an escape, not as a performance, but as a release. Every note was a truth. Every pause a scar turned soft. The crowd didn't clap when she finished, not at first. They sat stunned, breathless, suspended, in the kind of silence that feels sacred. Then someone stood, a child, then another, then all of them. Applause broke like rain. But Evelyn didn't hear it. She was staring at the paper, still folded on the stand. She opened it. Just one line. "You didn't play to be brave. You played because you already were." Evelyn smiled. She stepped off the stage and walked toward the back, where Caleb waited, hands in his pockets, eyes bright. She stopped in front of him. "You didn't have to write that," he shrugged. "I wasn't sure I could say it without messing it up." She handed the paper back. "I'm keeping it." He grinned. "I was hoping you would." Later that evening, after the chairs were folded and the room cleared, Evelyn sat at the piano again, this time with Caleb beside her. She lifted his hand and placed it on the keys. He looked confused. "I don't play." She nodded. "That's fine, just press one note." Together, he did. A low C. It echoed warmly in the empty room. She followed with an E. Then they played in turns, no pattern, just presence. It was clumsy. It was beautiful. When they stopped, neither spoke. There was no need. In the silence between the final note and the rest of the world, something had changed. And neither of them wanted to move too quickly and risk losing it. After the showcase, everything could have gone back to how it was: quiet days, at Vivace shared looks across the room, soft exchanges over coffee. But something had shifted, not just between Evelyn and Caleb, but inside her. The piano no longer felt like a memory of someone she used to be. It felt like a conversation she was still having. Every morning she came in early and played for a few minutes before opening. Sometimes simple scales, sometimes small ideas she hadn't put into words yet. Caleb kept coming, notebook in hand, coffee always the same. He wrote less now. Instead, he watched more, observed the way her hands moved, how her fingers hesitated before certain chords, how her face softened when a melody surprised her. One morning, she walked over to his table, her apron still on, and placed a piece of paper in front of him. 4 bars of melody written by hand. His eyes scanned the notes. "What is this?" she shrugged. "I think it's the beginning of something. I played it last night and thought it sounded like you." He looked up. "Like me." She met his gaze, a little unsure, a little searching, but steady. Caleb didn't reply. Instead, he reached for his notebook and tore out a page. He handed it to her. It was lyrics, not refined, not polished, but real. She read them twice. Her lips parted slightly, then closed. She folded the paper and tucked it into her apron. No comment, just a look. That evening, they stayed late after closing. Leonard, ever perceptive, left without a word, flipping the door sign to closed and giving them the cafe without conditions. Evelyn sat at the piano. Caleb stood behind her silent. She played the 4 bars. He hummed quietly, adjusting notes with his voice. Then she added a second line. He adjusted his words. They weren't trying to write a song, but somehow they were. It unfolded slowly like breath. A melody that wasn't in a rush to become something. No deadlines, no expectations. Just two people finding each other in the space between notes. At one point, Evelyn stopped playing and looked over her shoulder. "What are we doing?" Caleb smiled. "I don't know, but it feels like the first thing in a long time that doesn't need to be explained." She nodded and returned to the keys. They kept building it over the week, a little more each day, chord by chord, line by line. It wasn't perfect. That was never the point. The song started to carry meaning. It spoke about grief and stillness, about second chances and the fear of wanting something again. Evelyn began calling it the in-between song, the space between fear and hope, between holding on and letting go. One night, as they played it together, under the dim lights of the cafe, Caleb said softly, "You know this isn't just music." She looked up. "I know. Then why haven't we said anything? Because I'm still learning how to trust what I feel. And I don't want to ruin it by naming it too soon." He nodded. "Me too." They didn't speak of love, not yet. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of every word they weren't ready to say. One evening, a regular customer asked Evelyn if she would play something before closing. She looked at Caleb. He gave a small nod. She sat at the piano and began to play their song. No lyrics, just the piano. The cafe hushed around her, and when the last note faded, there was no applause. Just stillness, deep, respectful, moved. Later, as she was wiping down the counter, Caleb leaned over and whispered, "I think we found something." She looked up. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Not just the song, I mean this, us." Evelyn didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I think it was always there. We just didn't know how to listen." Caleb touched her hand gently, not to pull, not to claim, just to connect. In that moment, there was nothing to prove, nothing to protect. Only music, only them. Only the quiet understanding that what they had was not built in fireworks or declarations, but in every shared note, every silent look, every moment they let each other be seen without fear. The night of the cafe's anniversary arrived quietly, without fuss or fanfare. Leonard didn't want balloons or banners or grand speeches. Just live music, good coffee, and the right people in the room. He had invited a small group friends from his performing days, loyal customers, a few local musicians who had once graced Vivace's little stage. Evelyn hadn't planned to play. She told herself she would help behind the bar, manage the orders, maybe watch from the side. But when Leonard looked at her before the event began and simply said, "It's your room now," she knew she couldn't hide in the back. Caleb arrived early, his sleeves rolled, and a single flower tucked into his coat pocket. He gave it to her without a word. She placed it in a glass next to the register and smiled soft and certain. As the evening unfolded, the cafe filled with warmth. Jazz riffs and acoustic sets drifted through the space, laughter and clinking cups, forming a background rhythm. But the crowd shifted when Evelyn sat down at the piano. No introduction, no announcement, just a shared understanding that something important was about to begin. Caleb stood by the door, notebook in his hand, his presence steady and quiet like always. Evelyn looked down at the keys, then up at the room. She wasn't nervous, not this time. She was ready. She played their song, the one they had built together, piece by piece. The melody had changed slightly over the past weeks, refined itself without losing its rawness. It told a story that words couldn't hold. About loss, about silence, about the courage it takes to come back to yourself after everything you love has been buried. About how sometimes someone simply listening can save you. When she reached the final phrase, she paused. Then she began to sing. Her voice wasn't perfect. It cracked in places, it trembled, but it was real. And in every line, she sang what she had never said out loud. Caleb listened with his entire body, not just his ears. He felt every word like a thread tugging gently at the seams of all his guarded places. Evelyn finished the last note and let the silence fall. No one clapped at first, not out of disrespect, but because they were stunned, holding their breath as if the sound still lingered in the air, unwilling to break the spell. Then someone stood, then another. The room rose slowly in a standing ovation that didn't feel like performance. It felt like gratitude. Evelyn didn't bow. She just smiled and stood her hands still at her sides. Leonard wiped at his eyes behind the counter. Later, when the room had thinned and the coffee had cooled, Caleb found her at the back, near the kitchen, leaning against the wall. "You sang," he said, his voice full of something tender. She nodded. "I wasn't sure if I could. You did, and you didn't break." Evelyn looked at him. "I think I was waiting for someone to hear me." Caleb stepped closer. "I think I was waiting to be someone worth hearing." She reached for his hand, not dramatically, not with hesitation, just an honest gesture. And he took it. There in the back of a worn-out cafe with old lights and scratched tabletops, they stood without needing to explain anything. Not the pain, not the healing, not the way they had somehow written themselves back into life through each other. Evelyn whispered, "I think this was the room." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "The one I needed to be in when I was ready to start over." He nodded. "Then let's not leave it. Not unless we build the next one together." She smiled, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. They stood there long after the music had faded, after the guests had gone, after the lights had dimmed. The piano sat silent in the corner, content. The flower he gave her still stood in its glass petals, open, soft, and alive. And for once, there was no fear of what came next. Because they weren't waiting anymore. They were walking forward together. Spring arrived quietly in New York, washing the streets with softer light and warmer mornings. Vivat's had changed in subtle ways since that night, the anniversary performance that became more than just a celebration. A new chalkboard sign appeared near the entrance, handwritten by Leonard reading, "Live music lives here, but only if it's honest." Evelyn began to play regularly now, not always for an audience. Sometimes just for herself, sometimes just for Caleb, who still sat at his usual table, his notebook now half filled with lyrics and observations he never tried to publish. They never announced what they were to each other. There were no big declarations, no viral posts, no rings. Just quiet consistency. The way he brought her coffee before she asked. The way she slipped lyrics into his jacket pocket when she found the right chord. The way their hands always found each other beneath the table, not holding tightly, just touching like punctuation between two melodies. One afternoon, Caleb brought her to a small building in the East Village. It was nothing special on the outside, faded bricks, cracked windows, a creaky old door. But inside it was empty, full of light, full of possibility. She looked at him confused. "What is this?" He smiled. "A gift, or maybe a trade." "I want to build something here, with you. A music space, workshops, lessons. Recording rooms for kids who can't afford it. You teach, I fund, we both listen. Evelyn stepped into the room slowly, the echo of her boots soft against the wood. It felt open, like a page not yet written. Her voice was quiet. Are you sure? Caleb nodded. Music saved me before I even knew I needed saving. Then I met you and it started making sense. Evelyn walked to the far end where a piano would eventually live. She closed her eyes, imagined it there, imagined the laughter of students, the nervous silence before someone pressed their first note. She turned back to him. Okay, let's build it. A few months passed. Renovations began. Caleb called in every favor he had, but made sure everything stayed local, small, community-led. Evelyn worked with neighborhood musicians, bringing in people who had walked away from music like she once had and helped them return. She taught Ava's favorite song to a 10-year-old girl who reminded her of herself. One night, as they stood outside the almost finished studio, Caleb said, "Do you think she'd be proud of you?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She looked up at the stars, soft above the city glow. I think she'd remind me not to take it all so seriously. Then she'd tell me I play too fast. He smiled. Then she sounds like someone I'd want to meet. Evelyn looked at him. You've met her, in the quiet parts of the music. She's always there. He leaned in forehead, resting gently against hers. Then we'll make sure she always has a place to stay. They didn't need to say, I love you. The music had already said it in every line they wrote together. The grand opening of the studio came on a Saturday afternoon. No red carpet, just a long table of homemade pastries, a soft jazz trio near the window, and a room full of people who had once forgotten what they loved until they walked in. Evelyn stood at the front with Caleb beside her. She thanked everyone for coming, then played the first piece on the studio's new upright piano. Their song. The one without a name, the one that had carried them from silence into something full and alive. When she finished, the applause was warm and real. But what mattered more was the way Caleb looked at her. Like the note he had been trying to reach had finally been found. That night, back at Vivace, Leonard poured them each a glass of wine and raised his glass, to sound, and to those brave enough to return to it. They clinked glasses. Evelyn leaned against Caleb's shoulder, her voice soft. So what now? He smiled. Now we keep writing, together. She nodded, and we listen, always. As the lights dimmed and the world outside kept spinning, the cafe glowed with the quiet certainty that something rare had been built. Not fame, not perfection, but something far more valuable. A home, a song, a love that never asked to be seen, only heard.